Hello and welcome along to another episode of My Football Story from the Honest Football Podcast. This week, Charlie catches up with BBC Northern Ireland broadcaster Nicola McCarthy to discuss her brilliant career on the pitch and now as a broadcaster off it too. Nicola's got a multitude of experience in the game. Firstly, as a young player in Northern Ireland, we talk about her opportunities and her growth as a youth player, all the way to international honours with Northern Ireland. We also discuss a brief spell in the States and the domestic side of the game as well, and opportunities for young women at the time Nicola was involved in the playing side of her career. But after that, Nicola became involved in broadcasting, and as well as working Northern Ireland, was the face of Manchester City TV for a number of years in the early 2010s, and has worked with some of the world global superstars that Manchester City had at the time. We talk about her experiences with the players and the managers there, and some of her favourite moments in that role, before moving back over to Northern Ireland, where Nicola now works for BBC NI. She's a familiar face on RTV as she presents the Irish Premiership highlights show on BBC Northern Ireland, and is obviously a key broadcaster in one of our favourite leagues as a podcast. So we can't thank Nicola enough for joining us and sharing her story with us. If you do enjoy it, please do put a thumbs up on the video, subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast, loads of content from other people in the football broadcasting side of the game, and interviews with other Irish Premiership pros in the eye above. But this is Nicola McCarthy's football story, and we really hope you enjoy it.
Nicola, I really appreciate you obviously coming to talk to us today. I know that as we're recording, the Irish League kicks off again this sort of week, so I imagine it's a busy week for you. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, no problem at all, Charlie. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we'll talk about you and your career, and you know, one of the quite unique one for us as well, people we've interviewed in terms of being a player and then a broadcaster. But before we do all of that, we always go back to anyone we interview, their first football memory. So it could be, you know, playing, could be watching, you know, just take us on that journey. So your first ever time of remembering football, really.
I suppose it's really from my own personal perspective, Charlie. It's just playing football in the driveway with my brother. I have an older brother, 4 years older than me. We just played football probably most of our childhood. So I can never remember not loving football. It's a funny one because even when I look back myself, I think, where did that love come from? Was it my brother and his friends playing with them? Was it something I saw on TV? Was it my dad's a big football fan? But I just loved it. It was just a real natural passion. So just kicking the ball in the driveway, playing with my brother and his friends, and even in school, you know, in the playground. And very unusual, you know, I was the only girl just playing football in the playground. And I look back at that now and I think it's incredible how unusual that was at the time. But I do remember it was myself and the boys playing football. And so it's probably that in terms of, it was just a natural love. Anytime, my mum is a fantastic Irish dancer, and I could not do it, and B, had no interest in trying to be better. But my mum was a real proper champion Irish dancer, very well known in Irish dancing circles, and I'm her only daughter. So the Great White Hope, and all I wanted to do was play football. So, you know, God love her now as a parent, I'm thinking, oh, she must have been gutted in many ways that I wasn't, you know, a dancer, but it wasn't for me. Football was for me. And my mum just says, Nick, you just grew up kicking a ball. Anytime you saw one, you just kicked it, and that's really it, you know. I suppose watching in terms of those kind of things, it would have been the World Cups, the early World Cups that I remember, Charlie. Really probably vague memories of Italian 90, you know, but I do remember it, and I remembered being on TV, and particularly for some reason the Netherlands team, the Dutch team. I loved Marco van Basten, and I used to try and be him in the driveway. So I remember that strongly. And then very much 94, USA 94, huge memories of that. We used to spend our summers in Waterford in the south of Ireland. And I remember that World Cup so well. Obviously Ireland were there, and, you know, the Ray Huttons and the Tony Cascarinos of this world, and just everything around the USA tournament, I just really remember well. So I suppose from a watching point of view, and I think, Charlie, what I loved, it was the football, but it was everything that went with it. You know, the culture, the shirts, the hairdos, you know.
It's definitely the best time in terms of that, you know, like you say, kits and things like that, you know. I don't collect loads, but, you know, in terms of collecting shirts, like 90s, probably football shirts in general, but like you say, that mid-90 era was incredible for national team shirts, particularly, like you say.
Totally. And I've gone on a bit of it like yourself. Growing up, I had the shirts that I had with the teams I supported and my own shirts, obviously. But I've kind of gone on a little bit, in more recent years. I'll hunt some shirts out and buy some just random ones. So I love it. I love it when things, pop up like that. The whole culture of the sport I love,
Yeah.
As much as the sport itself.
Well, you sort of mentioned about that culture and that, and in terms of playing and watching on TV, you said about sort of football. But do you remember the first time you went to a football ground and that sort of experience, and who was playing and that sort of thing? Or for some people they were so young they can barely remember it. Or what was that like for you, really, in that sense?
Yeah, I grew up in Newton Ards, and we actually used to go. My dad used to take us to quite a lot of Ards matches. Now, I don't necessarily remember the first one I went to, but again, you're talking like mid-90s, early mid-90s. But we used to go to Ards all the time, down to the Portaferry Road, and we'd park up and we'd walk down to the game. I'd have my Ards scarf. Biggest standout moment in those days would have been when Ards won the County Antrim Shield. We were at that game, and I've photographs with the County Antrim Shield at that time and the Ards scarf. And I remember again just the whole kind of atmosphere around that time, and when there was huge followings and some questionable song lyrics, let's be honest.
I can understand what you mean in that sense.
For a young girl as well,
Yeah.
looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, right, okay. That's what that meant, right? But I love the whole. I love the whole. Just watching, all the players. Listen, there's a whole host of players. Yeah, there was just a lot of good memories from that time, and particularly that County Antrim Shield. I was saying to someone the other day, actually, someone in the league, about going to games, and we used to take toilet rolls and throw toilet rolls on the pitch. What was that for a start? And where bring back the toilet rolls.
Definitely.
But these days people want to hold on to them, I'm sure. But it was Andy Waterworth and Chris Morgan, because we were doing a show on Saturday, the Top 10 Goals show, and we were looking back on some old footage, and it was Morgan Day. It was Chris Morgan's goal, and there were toilet rolls on the pitch, and I thought, oh my goodness, the nostalgia. Just bring your toilet rolls and throw them on the pitch. Where did that go?
It's quite a few sort of things in stadiums seem to have died out. But it's funny you mention Ards, actually, because I think I mentioned to you privately. Obviously, my wife is Northern Irish, so I've only sort of been watching the Irish League for the last 6 or 7 years, about 7 years.
Yeah.
But the first game, and I've sort of seen the odd game on TV, but they were always thrillers, 4-3, Liverpool, Glentoran, and all these sort of stuff. But the first game I went to was Ballymena Ards, and it was at Bangor, because obviously Ards were playing out of Bangor at the time. And it was probably the most drab 0-0 I've ever seen. And I sort of thought, oh no, I've been missold a bit of a dream here, really. I will say I've been to quite a lot of games whenever we're over, and it is the only 0-0 I've ever seen in the Irish League. So I take comfort out of that. But anyway, we're here to talk to you about your career as opposed to Ards. But
we'll pick that up again.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that come later on when we're talking about it anyway. But before, obviously now we can see you on our TVs as a broadcaster. Before that, you are a player in that sense. So just sort of give us a bit of a flavour of that journey, really, because you ended up playing for your country. But you mentioned about school, and I suppose, I'm a PE teacher now, and girls' football still has got a long way to go, in my opinion, to maybe get the same sort of standing as boys' football. But for you as a player, back then, how difficult was it to maybe be a talented girl footballer and sort of take us on that journey of where you went from there, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it was. I suppose it's really only now when you see the developments, and as you say, there's still a lot of work to be done. But when you do see what's available to girls, when you do see the pathways and the opportunities and the way the clubs, a lot of clubs, most clubs are getting behind, the girls and women's game, you do think, oh my goodness, if that had have been there, if that infrastructure had have been there in my day, not just for me, but for all of my peers, the opportunities that may have presented to go down that professional line just wasn't there for us. And like I say, I do remember being the only girl. I was the only girl. I started playing in my primary school team. And yes, I was the only girl playing. But I was really lucky, Charlie. The lady who took the team, the teacher who took the team, was the P6 teacher in the school, Mrs. McCarthy. But even that was really unusual, And I do remember, the abuse she took from the sidelines, not to mention the abuse I took for playing.
Yeah.
I do remember all of that. But at the time you're young, you don't really take these things, to heart or on board. But I do clearly remember it. And there was one other girl in the school league in the area that I played in, my school played in. And we ended up playing together years down the line in a team called Northland Raiders, which was a North Down-based team. So I started in primary school. I moved on to secondary school. My secondary school didn't have a team, but what they did have, which was very lucky, even then in the mid-90s, was they had a Friday after school session, again ran by a teacher, right. Dominic Keeley, and he set this up as something for girls to get involved in a Friday after school. And it was only when I made that move, I met girls who were playing for teams because there was no team near me at the time. So that's when I first took my first step into club football and began with a team called Belfast United Ladies, which is now Glentoran Women. So that was my first team, 2 women running that team. Fantastic, putting hours of their time, so passionate and still are about the game. And I met other girls who I suppose were like me, whereas at primary school I only knew me and Shelley, the other girl I mentioned, who was the only primary school player, other female player. And like I had to get changed back in primary school days. I had to get changed in the teacher's car and Mrs. McConkey's car, and I didn't go into the changing room with the boys and various things like that, but she made it possible for me. She did everything she could to help me play. And as I say, move on to secondary school, no school team, but joined a club team. And my dad and another girl from the Belfast United team, her grandfather used to just give us lifts. So my dad would go one week and her grandfather would go the next week. And Kelly Bailey, she's still playing. She's 40 now and she's still playing for Glentoran Women, and I need to give her an honourable mention because she's incredible. I think it's her 25th season or something, and for the one team, and she's just an incredible player, incredible footballing brain, and she's still going, so fair play to her. So that was really it. Then I joined Glentoran Belfast United, and then around about the late 90s, maybe around just before the year 2000, like 99, a team did form in the area that I lived in the North Down area, a team called Northland Raiders, run by a husband and wife team from Hollywood. And they started the team. And actually, we trained opposite the Ards football ground. We trained on the Portaferry Road. So it was like full circle. And we had a fantastic team. And when you start, obviously, a new team, you have to go to the lowest division. At that time, there were 4 divisions. So we started in the 4th division and we worked our way 3rd, 2nd to 1st division in consecutive seasons. We had a great team, included some fantastic players. One of the girls, Ashley Hutton, is a Northern Ireland international, still a Northern Ireland international, has over 100 caps now. She got her 100th cap against Wales just last year. Yep. And Ashley was in that team, really talented girls. But again, the opportunities weren't massive there. And, a lot of us were getting a little bit older, not very old, but, getting a little bit older. But the young girls coming through, you were starting to see the the seeds of something. Then I went off to America and played for a year in Louisiana and had a fantastic experience there. The key takeaway from that trip was just how refreshing it was to be in a very professional setup. Now, I was in a Division 1 school, which, is a very highly competitive sporting school. But Charlie, that to go from what I'd come from to like this professional, setup, and really what stood out for me from that trip was the girls. It was like a badge of honor to play soccer. Whereas I think in Northern Ireland, I was almost embarrassed in my teenage years to say I played football. You were shying away from it and you had that drop off and you really seen the drop off. Whereas I went to America and it was like, I play soccer. This is my badge of honor. I am so proud. And honestly, it was like a breath of fresh air. I had a great year there. I had an opportunity to stay on, but I did come home to finish my degree at this stage. I was at Queen's University in Belfast. I came home to finish my degree and I joined Cliftonville, and I played at Cliftonville for 3 or 4 seasons, actually with my sister-in-law in the team as well, which was lovely. And after Cliftonville, then I moved to Manchester in 2011 and then played for a little bit with Manchester City Women, training with them for maybe about 6 to 8 months. But at that stage, they weren't part of the club. The team existed and that we trained. There was a guy called Lee trained us, but we trained at a school. The team wasn't yet part of the club. That didn't happen until 2014. whenever Man City Women became part of the club officially. So I played and trained a little bit when I went to Manchester, but I'm going to blame it on working at the weekends. It didn't quite work out, but there's maybe more truth to other reasons why it didn't work out.
As I say, I suppose Manchester's also known for its, it's quite a lot to do there, isn't there, I suppose, in that sense.
That's it. I was too busy with work. But no, genuinely, I love that. I love those training sessions because now, to be fair, I could still play, and I do still play. When I eventually came home to Northern Ireland, I played there for 2 seasons. This is the first season. The season just passed is the first I haven't played for a club team. But I had 2 kids then as well, so that would have been a bit difficult also.
Reasonable excuse, that isn't it, I suppose.
Reasonable excuse. But I remember even training with the girls at the Manchester City women's team. It was the fitness. It was how fit the girls were. And I remember thinking, if you're going to play, and if you're going to play for this team, you need to be unbelievably fit. The level had risen so much even then, and that was before the club took them in. So yeah, so I kind of stepped aside and focused on my broadcasting and let them train and play on. But obviously there was some international football, sorry, I should have mentioned, in the years that I was in Northern Ireland. The international setup still wasn't, great at the time when I was there, for particularly my year and the year below, 17s and under 19s. And then a decision was made to stop the senior team just around that time that we were kind of playing friendlies and various things. And then a decision was made around about 2000, 99, 2000, to stop the team and focus on the youth development, which is a shame. And I spoke recently to a few people. I did a documentary just about the history of women's football in Northern Ireland. Yeah, just went out on Boxing Day. It went out last Saturday on Radio Ulster again. But it was interesting because I didn't really know what happened in that time, and no one seems to really know. It was to focus on the youth development, but it's a shame because I think there was a real group of players there that, we could have gone on to do whatever, but it just one of those things at the time, but I'm still friends with lots of girls that I played football with. And I played for Queen's, sorry, I should mention, all my years at Queen's University I played. So we went to the British University Games for Northern Ireland. So we did have an international aspect through the university, just not at that time, which is a shame because those girls I was playing with for the Queen's team and the university team would have been great to have played more. But listen, that's what it is,
It's amazing the way it's changed now, because I know when I was growing up, my younger sister, she played football, not to the same standard as you, but it was always the big dream was to go to America, because that's where it was the hotbed for America, for women's football. But you almost feel like now, I mean, especially with the way the Women's League is organised in Northern Ireland, actually there's quite a lot of emphasis to stay now. You mentioned about Man City, they're nearly world renowned for their women's football as much as they are the men's, aren't they? So I think it's probably a testament to maybe the journey we've been on the last, like you say, probably 20 years from when you're going from folding a national team to now actually quite a lot. We're holding on to quite a lot of our talent in sort of this sort of part of the world, as opposed to everyone trying to go off to America and try and make it there almost in terms of the women's game. So I think that's quite it's quite an interesting journey, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, no, it is. That's true. And again, just to come back to those pathways and then being available, what's happening at the, international level in the Northern Ireland setup, what's being put in place, the structures that are being put in place, the opportunities, even in schools, football being introduced and just it being part of, our lives. And it's such a big sport here. Give the girls the opportunities. There's so much talent. Yeah. I do remember, not to blow my own trumpet, I don't mean this, but I was playing at a tournament again down on the Portaferry Road, and my brother was playing in the same tournament, obviously at a different age level, and I won player of the tournament, and I have a photo of it just outside my house with this little trophy. And I remember one of the guys coming over to me and my older brother at the time and saying, he was from Leeds United, there were scouts at this tournament, and he said, if you were a boy, I would take you with me. And at this stage, that didn't really mean so much when I was young, but it's something that I look back on now and I think, oh my goodness, like, had there have been the opportunities, but thankfully there is now. Yes. Thankfully, we are seeing, young girls playing. As I say, the talent is incredible. I remember some of the games I watched at Manchester City during my time at City with the under 10s, under 12s, under 14s. The talent of these young girls playing in the evenings at the Manchester City Football Academy, which is where we were based. And that was the joy of it. You could walk out of your work door and go and watch a game, or any age level, boys, girls, whatever. And the talent is there, and just to have those pathways and and develop that is just amazing. It's just fantastic to see.
And I think it's, you mentioned about maybe the exposure you're giving it, not just you personally, but even the sort of the BBC, who you work for now. But, there's quite a lot of outlets, isn't there, to give it a lot of exposure, which is great. I mean, as I said, we could probably do another hour just talking about, development of the women's game.
Yeah, totally,
I'm sort of conscious of not taking up your afternoon.
No,
so we'll get back to you in that sense. And obviously you mentioned about going to Queen's then for university and obviously playing football alongside that. In terms of that as a sort of a career of then going into broadcasting, was that always something you wanted to do? I know you mentioned about maybe going to America and possibly staying on there, but when you decided to come back here and finish your degree, was it your sort of mindset then, right, I'm going to finish this, and as well as playing football as a hobby, I'm going to make a career in sort of broadcasting? Or is it something that maybe just sort of fell upon you in that sense?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Charlie, because it's probably a little bit of both. When I was in America, I obviously was playing football and was just really enjoying it. And the way it works in America, you almost have to find a personal sponsor to sponsor you. And I had been offered at the end of my year a personal sponsor, but I would have had to gone into sophomore year, which is the second year of 4. Whereas if I came home and I had only 1 year at Queen's, so it was kind of 3 years at uni to finish a degree against 1 year at home.
Yeah,
that's what I decided to do. I have no regrets at all. Weirdly, when I was in America, I have always loved media, particularly in sport. And I love any sport that you can play: basketball, netball, hockey. I played them all. I loved them all. Even snooker, I would watch, and anything. I would watch anything going. I would watch it. Darts, whatever. That was always in me from an early age. When I was in America and playing football for the college, it was Centenary College. I started to get a bit involved in the college radio, like American colleges have. And I had my own show, and it was such a big sporting college that I did it was like a little sports show, basically just updating on what was happening that week in the sports scene. Maybe have a guest on, have one of the basketballers in, or the soccer players, or baseballers, whatever it was, and do a little interview. And then it had lots of music as well. So just how play lots of music. So it was great. And it was like a 1 hour show once a week. And that's really when my first kind of thoughts of, oh my goodness, I'd really like to do this for a living kind of came in. So it was really America in that sense. And then I, as I say, decided to come home, finish my year at Queen's, and then obviously apply for the next step. So I took a year out in between, as you did in those days when you were, footloose and fancy free.
Able to as well, I suppose. Now financially it's almost been impossible, wouldn't it? I think
I know, but that's
true.
For
students nowadays, it's
that is very true, actually, Charlie. It's a good point. I think we were very, very fortunate in that regard. I went off to, I did some charity work in Peru, spent a few months out in Peru working with kids in a kids' home, which was just amazing, playing lots of football with them. I then went off to Thailand, New Zealand, and Australia for that year, to think about what I wanted to do. What a way to think about your next steps.
It's not the worst place to contemplate life, is it, I suppose?
No, this is it. And then, so when I did the process, I was always interested in teaching as well. Mm-hmm. So it was between the two, really. But as I say, that experience in America really kind of was what that moment that you talk about, that you kind of thought, yeah, I'd really like to do this. So I applied for a master's in journalism. Luckily enough, I got in the course and did it in Coleraine and got my master's then. And then I was straight into work the year after, which was great. I started at UTV in Belfast, and then really my career went from there. So I was quite lucky that things fell the way they did, but there was also that moment of, yeah, I'd love to give this a go.
I know, I appreciate you sort of being so honest about that. And our podcast, we try not to always ask the same questions that, you'd always get when we speak about yourself. And we're not after a sound bite or anything like that, but it's probably something we have to address in terms of being a female broadcaster. Did you find maybe opportunities a bit harder for you personally, or was it actually just, I suppose what I'm getting at is did people see you as a female broadcaster or just a broadcaster? And did that affect your opportunities when you left university and you got your masters and all of that sort of thing?
I think what I would say is things have changed a lot, in recent years, which is, again, great to see. Did I have to try a bit harder? Was it more difficult? I do feel I probably had to work that little bit harder, maybe. But then I've had a lot of opportunities as well. So there's such a drive at the moment to improve things, and you can really see that the landscape is changing. I have worked in a male-dominated industry, I suppose I have to say that. And it's just so good now to see, like it is with the female footballers, that the opportunities are now, coming your way. But, there were times, particularly during my time at Manchester City and And that was in the early, what do you call them, 2010s,
Yes.
tennies, or whatever they're called.
Yeah, we'll go with that. That's right. Yeah.
Go with the tennies. There were times then, yes, I did walk into Premier League football grounds and go into a press room and be the only female. And maybe, yes, there were times where I felt I had to prove myself. I suppose that's the way I would put it, more than a man might have to do. Because no one, again, knows you either, or knows your background, or knows that you played. So yes, there were times where, many times, I was the only female in the press room. That is changing, thank goodness. It's so good to see the opportunities that are arising. And I encourage any young person to try and forge a career in sports broadcasting. And like anything, like any job, it's tough no matter what, who you are, what you've done. You've got to put the work in, you've got to put the hours in, but it's your passion. So I'm also very fortunate to have the job I have. But yes, you have to work hard. You really, really do.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was going to be my sort of next question in terms of that, but you've sort of answered it in terms of, from the outside, it appears to be changing and there seems to be opportunities, not men and that sort of thing. There's lots of opportunities for lots of people from different backgrounds and cultures and things like that, which is great. But I was sort of just wondering from your perspective, from the inside, for want of a better phrase, whether that is actually sort of happening, and it's sort of great to hear that in that sense.
No, it definitely is, definitely. And I know at the BBC we've a real commitment to that as well. And, you can see in various media outlets that there is a real commitment to that. I think what'll help that as well is the development around sport in general as well for females, not just in football, but, across the spectrum. I think that'll also help to feed that as well. But no, it's definitely, the opportunities are out there. And, I've been lucky, as I say, in my career to have had them, and, even made a move across the water and enjoy that, and, make the relationships that I did, and get the experience, and then come home again and try to apply that here. And it's great to see.
I was going to say, well, you've led beautifully onto that journey over the water, as obviously going to Man City. And I know you probably get asked about this a lot, so we'll try and sort of do a different sort of perspective on it. But obviously, I suppose the question you must always get asked is, how did that happen? But the sort of second part to that is it enjoyable to get paid to watch football? Because that's always the dream for us as fans. It can't be amazing to get paid to watch football and to be. But actually, is that true? Is there, there must be sort of other sides to the job that are maybe not as fun, but like any job in that sense. But I suppose the first part was, how did that happen, and then maybe your experiences of that.
So really, I was working at home in Northern Ireland, having graduated with my master's from Coleraine, and I was working for maybe 3 years before I got the city job, and just trying to do as much sport as I could, and also working a little bit in news, but just trying to look for opportunities, trying to create opportunities. I mean, football, as I said at the very start, has been my absolute life's passion. It's just been, my number one, and I always just thought that I really would love to work in the football media industry, but also felt that I'd something to give in that arena as well. So I suppose that's what drove me, Charlie. And really, I just looked around for opportunities, applied for various things, and kept my eye out. And then the job came up at Manchester City. I saw it in the Guardian, and I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for this and see what happens. Not really expecting too much. Anyway, I applied for the job and got an offer then for the interview. So I had to give a 15-minute presentation. I'll never forget it. I found it on an old Mac that I fired up the other day, actually, along with a lot of questionable photos and some good photos too, to be fair. But I found my presentation, and I sent it to my old boss just for a bit of a laugh. But it was all around how you engage with fans in a global digital world, essentially. But I remember I had a week to prepare this presentation. Prepared the presentation. I went over to Man City, delivered the presentation. It was a panel of 4 people. I didn't really take anything from them in terms of, how I'd done. It was in a box in the Etihad Stadium. So it was such a beautiful setting. And really, if you didn't want the job before you went for the interview, you certainly wanted the job after the interview, because they gave you a real taste of. I can even remember the smell of the stadium, and just the whole feeling, how football fans feel about stadiums anyway, the whole atmosphere. And it was just a fabulous experience. It was a beautiful day, and I left that interview thinking, oh my goodness, that was class. Whatever happens, that was really amazing. But a phone call, I think, the next day, and was offered the job. And at that point I realized, oh my goodness, I have to actually move to Manchester. I hadn't really thought about the fact that I would have to move. Myself, my husband, we'd just gotten married. We discussed it, and he was like, "You have to go." Moved across to Manchester and had the most amazing 5 years at Manchester City. It's like anything. It's only when you reflect and you look back that you really, I suppose, appreciate what that was. They just won. They were just about to win their first Premiership title. For 5 years, I travelled with the first team everywhere: Premier League, Champions League, pre-season tours, post-season tours, reporting, doing interviews, commentating, everything. It was just an incredible time. Got the opportunity as well to watch the women's team evolve, from 2014, and watched that whole process and how the club, did that and how they dealt with it, which was just incredible. So got to watch all of that unfold and just build some incredible relationships. And I've nothing but amazing things to say about my time there. It was just incredible. Dream job, to be honest.
I was going to say, anyone, I've watched quite a lot of the stuff you've done on there, and I'll be honest, it looked like you were just having fun and getting paid for it in a weird way, like you just it didn't seem like a job. But one thing I wanted to ask you really in that sense, and I know you probably get asked about, what's this player like, what's that player like. I don't really want to sort of go about that, but you got to work with global superstars, let's be brutally honest, at Man City.
Yeah.
Are they suspicious of people in the media? And I know you worked for the club, so I don't want to use the term in-house, but it's one thing me talking to like an Irish League footballer, and they've been great. The whole Irish League community, for example, is fantastic. I can't imagine you'd say the same about, maybe a superstar at Manchester City. So are they a bit suspicious? And also, how do you break that down as someone working with them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, again, it's a brilliant question, and it's very true what you say. I mean, it is very different in that sense. And, it's not like an instant let you in, and you do have to work at the relationships. And I remember my boss kind of saying that to me. And the year I started the 2011-12 season, there was a Euros that summer.
Yes.
And my boss, Chris, said, "Listen, I'm going to send you down to Carrington." They were training at Carrington at the time. We didn't have the CFA, the City Football Academy. So training at Carrington. He said, "I'm going to send you down to Carrington. I want you to sit in the reception. And as the players come in, I want you to ask them how their Euros were, if they were at the Euros, which most of them were, and how their summer's been and whatever." Now, bearing in mind, I'd seen them a little bit towards the end of the season, but I hadn't properly, I'd only just joined. So there's me sitting in the reception of Carrington as they all drive in and park up. And I'm like, "Oh, hi, Sergio. Hi, Vinny. Hi, Joe. You've no idea who I am, but how's your summer been and how was the Euros?" So it was one of those, but I suppose I say that because it was the start of that process of building relationships, which is such a big thing, of course, in this job. And it's not an instant, players have to be they have a little kind of circle of people, their inner circle, I suppose, and it takes time and it to be around them, and it's a trust thing. It's essentially a trust thing. Once you earn their trust and they know they can trust you and they know that you're honest with them, then that's really it. That just breaks everything down. But it does take time, and it just takes being around, yourself. It's a very relational thing. It's a human thing as well, just having those little moments of human, we're all the same, so having those little moments of maybe when I was pregnant with Sophie in 2014, Joe Hart's wife was pregnant at the same time, or just little moments like we were very lucky at Carrington, the access we had, and we were just part of the team, and we would have sat and had our lunch with the players, with Julian Lescott, Micah Richards, James Milner, Joe Hart, Gareth Barry, Vinny, Sergio, Pablo Zabaleta, David Silva. You just would have sat and had your lunch and, had the crack. So, that was really lucky times, I think, really, because it is a little bit, you maybe wouldn't sit in the CFA and have your lunch anymore with the players, but you still get the opportunity, don't get me wrong, to build those bonds. But it's just by getting to know them getting to know you. Then once that happens, and once they know they can trust you, then that's it, really. It's just great, what you can get from the players. Genuinely, everybody asked me, what was so-and-so like? What was so-and-so like? And genuinely, the squads that I work with, I can tell you, are just amazing people, and really just good, normal, nice people,
It's fascinating to hear that, Nicola. I really appreciate sort of opening up about that. And I just wanted to ask a question. It's probably related to Man City, but just generally sort of being a broadcaster. Yep. Sometimes is it hard when there's negative stuff, maybe it goes on in the game, and not just necessarily at Man City, but if you take recently, for example, like Wigan going into financial trouble, and if you were going to broadcast about that kind of stuff, is it hard to remain factual and maybe not have, because you must have an opinion on it even privately. How hard is it to balance that between sort of being factual but also maybe not being happy that something's happened in the game that you necessarily don't agree with? Do you know what I'm getting at? Sorry, that sort of point in that sense.
I think it's just all part of the job, really, is that you have to remain impartial. And yes, we're all human beings, and we'll have an opinion, or which we'll maybe discuss with our partners or whatever. But I think and it just comes back to the core, I suppose, journalism. The job is to tell the story. The job is to be impartial. The job is to look at both sides and tell both sides of the argument. I suppose it always has to come back to your basic training and your basic kind of what you're there to do. Of course, there's times where you're going to have an opinion, but in the spirit of what you're there to do, and the job, you have to deliver the facts. You have to have your sources, at least your two sources. Again, it's just back to that. You never forget those real core values of, I suppose, of reporting.
It's fascinating for us to hear that, really, because obviously we only just sort of see the end product. But we'll fast forward a bit now in terms of, obviously, you mentioned about Man City and the sort of amazing time that you had there. But you're back in Northern Ireland now, so I suppose you sort of alluded to maybe why that was. But I just sort of wanted to sort of touch really initially on sort of your perception of the Irish League. And I suppose we've asked players about, I know that you're going to laugh and it sounds a bit of a silly question, but who've maybe played in England and then come back and expected to walk into an Irish League team, and it hasn't worked that way for them. Does that work the same with broadcasting, where you may be in such a massive global institution of Manchester City, and this is not no disrespect to the Irish League, but it's obviously wouldn't be necessarily as globally well known, for example, as Man City. What's your mindset going back, that maybe not you'd walk into a job here, but do you know what I'm getting at, that kind of thing, because of where you've been before, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I would start by saying I just feel so kind of fortunate that things have worked out the way they have. I think I was fully aware. I think being in the industry, and when I was in Manchester, I'd gone freelance already, and I'd already started working with BBC in Salford.
Right.
So for BBC Sport and BBC Five Live in Salford, and still continuing to work for Manchester City for the club and a few other kind of outlets. So I'd already gotten that taste for life outside of Manchester City again, if you like. And I knew, and I was fully aware of the hard work. You don't start again, but yourself, you have to build up your relationships with other people. It's like any job, changing any job, you've got to put the work in, So I think I was pretty aware of what it would take for things, to work out to get a job back home. And like I say, I'd already, started working with the BBC, started speaking to BBC here in Northern Ireland. I know nothing at all was kind of taken for granted. I knew that, as I say, the work would have to be done, and you've got to, as I say, build those relationships again. And I'm very fortunate that I did play football here, that I went to university here, that it wasn't until slightly later when I moved away. So I did have really strong foundations here and really good relationships and things that I'd built up over the years before I'd gone. So that really helped, but, beyond grateful that things that have worked out, coming home. I have 2 kids now. That was, a huge part of our reasons for coming home. And Sophie, my older girl, was about to start school. So we knew we had to make some decisions. And it was hard, don't get me wrong, Charlie. It was very difficult. And I think it's one of those situations where there's no right or wrong. You just got to do what I suppose feels right for you and your family. So but I could see as well that there were, potential opportunities in Northern Ireland. I'd been freelancing with BBC Sport NI before becoming full-time there, so I'd already started freelancing and doing various things, and then the show came up, which I got the opportunity to host, which was amazing. Even, like I say, reference again the show, the top 10 goals. I'm not plugging the show, by the way.
No, I've got to be honest, I watched it yesterday. It was brilliant, I've got to say, actually.
Yeah.
There was a couple of times they were playing football in the background and they were starting to get ever so slightly closer to you, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, that's it. We thought we were going to have to, do a bit of a half volley and kick a ball away at some point, But so even like, just getting back, and I was saying to Andy Waterworth and Chris Morgan on Saturday when we filmed that, just coming home and being part of the league again. And, as I say, I did used to go and watch Ards and back in the day be involved in the league. And my cousin was a huge Glentoran fan, and we used to go to Glentoran games together. Just coming back and getting to know the league again, and it's got so much to offer, and I just love working in it. I remember the first game I worked at was at Cliftonville. It was at Cliftonville at home, and it was at Solitude. And I remember going in. This was after kind of being in the Etihad and Stamford Bridge and Old Trafford, and and people were saying, "Oh my goodness, like you're government Premier League." But to me, it's football, and I remember walking into Solitude that day, and I genuinely mean this. I was as happy doing that as I was walking into, and I genuinely do mean that. The big grounds. Listen, I've experienced them all, which I'm so happy about, and I loved, as you can imagine, the trips that I've had. But genuinely, I love football so much that if I'm around it, and if I'm in a stadium or around players or managers, it doesn't matter. To me, that's what I love about the game, is the universality of it, is the community, it's the connection with people who love it as much as you do. That's what I love, and I think the Irish League is just full of that. And to be honest, it's just been lovely coming home, and the standard of the league now, and the players in the league, the managers. I've really enjoyed just building those relationships again, getting to know it again, and I just love working in it. I really, really love it.
I've got to say, yeah, I completely agree with you. And, obviously, as I say, my sort of Irish League journey won't be anywhere near as long as yours. But when I first started sort of getting involved and watching it, it's such an honest league. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but I think it genuinely is. And I just love, even like you say, you mentioned Solitude. I think it's the only ground I've been to where, the fans sit behind either goal. It's sort of, you don't really get those sort of, and, you go to lots of, Premiership grounds and stuff, and they are great, they're fantastic, but you don't necessarily get those little quirks, do you? And that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Those sort of things I love, like you say, it is such an honest league. I just wanted to really quickly talk to you about, obviously, you mentioned doing the working, particularly the Irish League and BBC NI. I know it's a bit of an odd question, but how do you ensure, I suppose, not impartiality, that's the wrong word, but if you're making like a highlights package, for example, some teams might have a larger support than others, but probably easy to fall into that trap, and maybe always having Linfield on first as an example. How do you sort of ensure that doesn't happen, and how do you sort of get a range across the league, really, in that sense? Because I suppose it is easy to fall into the trap of just going to the same old places, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, no, that's true. So really, when doing the highlights program last season, it was obviously a lot easier than this season, given where we're at in the world and what's going on. But last season, certainly we just traveled around. We tried to get to every ground, at least once. That's just what we did. We've reporters. We're lucky enough to have reporters at every ground, obviously, every week. So if something does happen, we can always pick up there. But yeah, we just tried to travel around, and we'll just cover the league as a whole. This season's been a bit more difficult. We've tried, obviously, not to travel too far. We've tried to keep, for me, I live in Hollywood, which is very close to Belfast. We've tried to keep me 10 miles from home, which, has oftentimes been in the regulations and things. So that'll obviously change again, hopefully in the not too distant future, and we'll get out, back, traveling further to Coleraine and Warren Point and various places. In terms of the running order, how we cover teams, it's literally just led by what happens on the pitch. We have an idea what order we might have, but just like match of the day, we will go with what happens on the day and where the best goals are and where the best action is. And we literally just have to be guided by what happens in the pitch. And sometimes you're running orders right, and sometimes you're running orders just wrong, because even match of the day just gone. Actually, they were planning for the derby to be the Manchester derby to be the big game, and then it was 0-0. So they were like, I remember Gary Lineker opening the show and saying, "Well, we've got this big." No, it was Chappers. It was the match of the day too on Sunday night. We planned this whole big, intro into the game. We're going to play it anyway, but it's not the first game, So like, it can even at that level, it's like, listen, you can plan all you like, but what happens on the day, what happens on the pitch will dictate how we cover the games, and that's really that's really it.
Obviously, Nicola, as well as doing working on the sort of men's senior side of the game, it's been great to see a lot of the, the women's profile being raised for the BBC, particularly with the BBC NI as well. So just tell us a little bit more about that, and, how you've been involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it's been fantastic, to be able to do that. And, we've always covered the women's games and done highlights packages, but this year we were able to do a little bit more, which was fantastic. So we had the women's highlights show as well as the men's highlights show, obviously, that we do every Saturday. We had the women's highlights show once a week this season, which very like the men's. We went out to a game when we could, of course, when restrictions allowed it, and we reported live from the game and covered the rest of the games in the league. So that, highlight show was great to have this year, and we had player interviews, etc., just getting to know the girls more, the teams more, the managers more. So it was absolutely brilliant, Charlie, and great to do. And just shows, how much the game is growing and how much the coverage is growing. So it's just absolutely fantastic. And also we had a big one this season where we had our first live streamed women's NIFL Premiership game when Glentoran won the league. So we had their game against Crusaders streamed live, and I provided the commentary for that one, which was a huge privilege and a huge honor for me, especially given my kind of, history and links with the game. I was honored to do that. So that was a huge thing for us. And again, just shows where things are at, where things are going. And we'll see a lot more of that in the coming years, that's for sure.
No, it's great to sort of see the profile being raised in that sense, like you say, through what you're doing. What I wanted to go on to was about, in terms of, you mentioned about covering games. We've got some quick fire questions that we'll move on to in a minute at the end. But what's the sort of pros and cons? And what I mean is you get some teams where the kit is a bit of a funny colour and it's hard to sort of, do you know what I'm getting at, that kind of stuff? Or numbers on the back of shirts. Like, what would be maybe the pros and cons of working in the sort of way that you do, really?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a good point, because if you have a monitor beside you where you have the action, then great. But a lot of the time you don't. So it's the shirt numbers and it's the, it's reacting. And I suppose that's something that's slightly different in terms of the Premier League. You would always have had those things in the Irish League. You might not have a monitor or whatever. So you are maybe have to be a bit more tuned in. You can't take your eyes off for a second, really. And it's like any job, if you love it and, it's the best job in the world, it's the best job in the world for me. And all my friends who know me and my family, they just they don't see me doing anything else. And they're like I am. They're so happy that I'm doing what I do, because I feel so happy and so fortunate that I have the job I have, and I genuinely never take it for granted. But again, you've got to put in, I think, especially when you're starting out, you've got to put in the hours, you've got to put in the dedication, the passion, the hunger really has to be there. The media now is always evolving, so you've got to stay across, certain things. I think that's probably a challenge, as it were. And then, it's not a 9 to 5, you will be out on a Saturday, you will be out on a Tuesday night. I've got a family, but listen, the way I look at it is I love it, and it's my passion, and you make up for that in other ways. Then you'll have some days off during the week where you can spend some time, you can get the homeschooling done or whatever it is you're doing right now. I think it works both ways, and there was a time there, certainly when the kids were at school and schools weren't closed, and maybe I had my day off, I was able to go and play golf, for a few hours on a Tuesday morning on my day off, because I worked on the Saturday, and did various things. So like any job, there's bits and things you have to take. But listen, I cannot complain for 1 second, and I'm so thankful for it, really.
I was going to say, I was already envious of what you do anyway, but to find out you sort of get paid to watch football and then play golf on Tuesday, that's sort of living the dream, really, there, aren't you? And
don't tell my boss that.
No. What we always do is, I did say to you earlier, we wouldn't ask you the same sort of question you always get asked, but we always sort of do finish with some quick fire. So I do apologise if you've maybe been asked these a fair amount of times before. Some of these are probably quite tough for you, actually, given your job.
I'm nervous.
Oh, no, bad guy. No. First one would be like, as what would be your favourite ground you've worked at?
That is a really good question, because they're all so different. And with football and with where you are in your life and in your career, you always will remember big moments. And it's not just to pick a big one out of the hat here, Charlie, but genuinely being at the Bernabeu for Man City's semi-final second leg game in the Champions League. They didn't make it to the final in the end. It was just it stands out because of the enormity of the occasion for the club. They'd never been in a Champions League semi-final before, and in with a chance, if they'd have done it that night at the Bernabeu to make it to the final. So for that reason, it stands out, what it meant to the club, what it meant to the players, what it meant to the manager was just incredible. It stands out because it's the Bernabeu, and it's one of the most iconic stadiums in world football. It was full. It was absolutely jam-packed. Just the whole atmosphere. The Spanish fans sit with their little seeds and spit the seeds, and I just love all that And I just remember sitting there that night. It was a beautiful night. Sitting there like shorts and t-shirt, ready to report on the game, and just going, wow, I will remember this the rest of my life, no matter what happens. And obviously City didn't make it in the end, and then I had to go and do some post-match interviews, which is always tough, when especially in a hyped up to a big occasion like that, with Noel Gallagher out with us. And women's team came as well. They were there to support. Oh my goodness, I remember we did a few interviews with the women's team. So we'd Steph Houghton and Tony Duggan and Jill Scott, and all those girls were there. And it was just such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. So in terms of grounds, and I suppose that's going more on the occasion, but I have to say that's probably the moment. The Allianz Bayern Munich's ground's amazing as well. It's just fabulous. I was lucky enough to, in Australia, when we were on pre-season tour, to go to a game at the MCG.
Right.
There's loads, but that Bernabeu sticks out. In terms of the Irish League, listen, it's just full of character. Grounds with stories coming out of the rafters, which again, you just love. I'm not going to pick an Irish League, my favourite Irish League ground, just to stay neutral. It's just the history again, the stories, being in the boardrooms of the Irish League clubs, I love, because you always get to see little gems of, times gone by. And but that Bernabeu moment, I'll take that as a standout.
I've got to say, of all the people we've interviewed, the names you've been able to pull out have been, fantastic compared to other people we've interviewed before, in terms of, I just wanted to quickly say on that in terms of the Irish League sort of stuff, in terms of the character. I know there's a story that floats around Ballymena about a lamb shank getting thrown onto a pitch and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You just don't get that anywhere else, do you, in that sense? But...
Oh, listen, that's what you have to love about. They're just the stories, and I still meet people and, would have gone to Irish League games over the years, and friends that I have, fans of clubs in the league, and the stories and you can't beat it. You can't beat it.
The next one, if it's too divisive, then don't really have to answer it. But it'd be the best manager you've worked with. So that could be at Man City, or could be, through working in the Irish League or other parts, just, your favourite manager, not necessarily best in terms of what they won, but in terms of your favourite manager to work with as a broadcaster.
I'm going to give you two, but for different reasons, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start with Pep Guardiola, because I, even before Pep joined the club, I was just fascinated by Pep. I've read his books, I've listened to numerous podcasts and watched various interviews, and I was just fascinated by him. Anyway, so him coming to the club, as you can imagine, and getting that opportunity for him to be the manager of the club that you're working for, was just incredible. From a pure footballing lover point of view, it was just incredible. And just his mindset, and I don't need to tell anybody the way it works, his dedication, his passion, all of that. It's just to be around someone like that, the ultimate perfectionist as well, to watch him in training. Just amazing from a media point of view, and from where those times, I have to say that Roberto Mancini was amazing, because he got the media side of things, and listen, it's changed again, and this is not due to any manager's thing, it's just the way football is slightly. I think the way it is now, it's just slightly different. I mean, when I started out at Man City, things were fresh, and club channels were just developing and growing. It was very exciting. And we had Roberto Mancini in charge, and he kind of bought into all of that. And he used to let us just kind of, do whatever we want to gather the content. And so I think for that, from the media perspective, Roberto was great for us, because he gave us that kind of reign to do whatever we wanted, to try things, to bring the fans in as much as possible, and really just bought into all of that. So for that reason, at that time, I think I have to say Roberto was just incredible.
Two great names to have there for that, in fairness to you. The last two questions are just about, from your perspective as a player now. So who's the best player you ever played against, or with, if it's easy for you to say with, whichever you prefer?
Okay, that's a hard one. Charlie, I worked with so many incredible players. Can I give you two? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is Ashley Hutton, who I mentioned at the start of the podcast. Ashley, as I say, I played with at Northland Raiders. Ashley's still playing, plays for Linfield, is still obviously part of the Northern Ireland setup, has been, key in their success in getting to the playoffs for the Euros. And Ashley came in. Now, Ashley's a couple of years younger than me. And when Ashley came to Northland Raiders as a young girl, maybe, 14, 15, she was so professional, not just in her football, but in the way she conducted herself. And I remember she just stood out, and playing with Ashley, almost like playing with like a Paul Scholes kind of figure. They're going to be there. Yeah. They know what they have to do. That they will provide the ball you need, but they're solid, and you can trust them. It's like Vinny Company as well. It's that kind of solid as a rock, delivers in, week out, dependable leader. And she's just I can't speak highly enough of Ashley. And like I say, to see her do that year in, year out, and to see her, now in a position where she's helped get the Northern Ireland women's team to a playoff for a Euro finals for the first time ever. That's just exceptional. And the second one is Marissa Callaghan, also still a Northern Ireland international. And just like Ashley, has played consistently week in, week out, season in, season out for years. For the one club in this case, Marissa at Cliftonville. And I've played with Marissa and I've played against Marissa. And again, just like Ashley, as soon as I saw her, when I played in my Cliftonville days, she just stood out, mostly for her incredible left foot and how she can strike a ball. She's just amazing, just amazing, and she continues to be amazing. But again, like Ashley, for her work ethic, for her commitment, for her passion, for her drive, and still, to this day, like Ashley, again, part of the Northern Ireland setup, Northern Ireland captain, has brought the team, helped bring the team to this point. Those girls are just exceptional. So I think I'm going to have to go with those two.
Two not bad names there, to be fair, Nicola. So yeah, but obviously you've worked and played in football for a long time. So we're going to give you sort of the last question will be your favourite game, but in two parts. So your favourite one as a player, but then also your favourite one you've sort of worked at. So across your career, really.
I think as a player, it's probably going to have to be at the British University Games back in 2003, I think it was. Mm-hmm. At that time, we were being managed by Jerry Flynn, former Irish League player and manager. Jerry.
Yeah, he's a lovely fella, yeah.
He's a great guy. So Jerry came in to coach us for a spell, maybe 1 or 2 seasons at Queen's Women. And Jerry was great, and we all got on brilliantly with him. And anyway, we went off to the British University Games with the Northern Ireland team. There was quite a few of us Queen's girls on the team, and we were playing England, and we took an early lead. Now, we didn't go on to win the game, I have to say, but it was just the feeling at that moment, and word got around that Northern Ireland were beating England, and people just came down, in their droves to see what was going on. And I remember it because we were just like, right, okay, we have a chance here, we really can take these on, potentially a bit naively in the end, but it was just when we went 1-0 up, and the feeling of that, and just that, the pride, I suppose, that you felt, and the people coming down to watch and what was going on, and I remember I assisted the goal as well. So it was just one of those lovely moments. And yeah, it's probably the one that sticks out for me as a player, to say that we were leading England at one point, and we'll take that even if we didn't win the game. Yeah, so that as a player, and I suppose that time playing with a lot of the girls were the Queen's set up, so you were going off and just representing Northern Ireland and all that came with that, and Jerry being the manager and his input, and it was just a fantastic team and a fantastic time. So yeah, I'll go with that one.
Do you know what, Nicola? I've enjoyed every minute of this. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. Hopefully you've enjoyed being the other side of an interview, because I suppose you're normally this side of it, so it's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's it. No, I have. Thank you.
In that sense. But thank you so much. As I say, if people want to sort of keeping up to date with what you're doing, obviously we'll put like your Twitter handle and things like that in the show notes. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much for giving up your time, and all the best for the rest of the season, doing what you're doing at the minute.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks so much for having me.